part, I'm going to teach you how to start creating the base of your 3D can. Now, the tool that we're going to start using here is a spline. So if you look at the right screen here, you've got a whole bunch of tools. I'm not going to go into detail on all of these tools, but basically they just change the shape of the objects you're working with. They modify them, they clone them, they create edges, all kinds of things. You've got your camera, you've got lights, and you've got text as well as primitive objects here just to start off with. Now what we're going to use here is just a simple circle. You've got your circle bang right in the middle. See, that's why it's important to set your image up right in the middle so it's good straight from the beginning. And you want to set it to the XZ plane and start scaling down your spline here. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just zoom in. This is why the importance of high quality images. This is where it actually comes into play. This scene, you know, we've got a low quality image, but we've also got reference images, so it's not that bad. We can go back and just adjust the background scene, line it up a little bit better. Yeah, that's close enough. Move it up. Not perfect, but for the purpose of this tutorial, it doesn't really matter. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is start to duplicate our spline. The way you can do that is by holding Control and left click to move your object. So we're going to move it up, and what we're going to do is start to create these borders here. If you want to select T, T is the scaling button. So every time you move it up, you want to scale it a little bit and get as close as you can to the edge. Move it up, scale. You can use the grids for reference on spacing if you want, or you can just use your eye. Really depends on how technical you want to be. Either way, when you scroll in and out, the squares, they change size, so it's kind of hard to use it as a reference. So we'll go like this, make it a little bit bigger. Again, move it up. And now when you're creating an edge of an object, so for example here, the can goes, it starts off smooth, it's sharp at the bottom and it's sharp at this corner. Every time you have a sharp edge, you want to make sure that there's two lines as close as possible to each other. And that helps define the sharp edge. The first thing we're going to do is just do this. We'll start building it. So I'll do this quickly. Now for this top section here, we are just going to make sure that it's in the middle. So it doesn't need to line up exactly here, but because the can goes in, we're going to create the inner section, which you can't actually see. So we're going to use a little bit of our eyesight here to define where is the middle. So that's the can curving around, that's the top of the can, and then we want to create the inside there. And let's say this is the base of the can lid. So let's continue to bring this inwards. So bring it about there. Kind of hard to see where it is. If you need reference, just kind of pull it down. Yeah, it looks about right. And then put it in the back spot. That makes sure that everything lines up correctly. There we go. And then for this last part, we're going to jump out of this scene. So middle click. There you go. You can see the perspective here of how we've built a 3D can so far. It practically is a blueprint. Now for this section, because we're creating a flat surface in the top just for now, we are going to hit T for scale, and we're just going to hold Control and left click, move it in a little bit. That means it's going to be on the same horizontal line here, but it's going to create that sharp edge there. And then we'll just create one more for good luck, which will keep the middle flat. You can scale it all the way down to 0. You won't see it now, but you will in the end. All right, for this next section, we're going to go in here and select the Loft tool. So Loft will be our tool for creating the 3D object. Now we're going to drop all of these splines inside Loft, and there you go. There is a 3D can. This is based off of our blueprint. Doesn't look great right now. It's a little bit sharp, and that's where we start to go into the detail here. So we select the Loft button, and you've got subdivisions U. So that's defining the outside shape. Now to change the view here, you want to go to display and select garage shading. That'll help you see where the reflections are. So we can make this big, make it sharp. You can see that like that. You can also do with lines. You can see how sharp it becomes. So let's just select 32. That's usually a good number for the amount of lines on the outside for the subdivisions. Subdivision V is up and down. So we can keep that low because we've created a lot of subdivisions going up and down. Now, I'm not too happy with the edge here. It looks quite thick. Alright, so what I've done here is I've just swapped the back image with one of my other reference images, which is just a canned front-on image. Like I said before, I wasn't really happy with the top edge here, so I've gone back to the front image and I've swapped that image out with something that is another reference. That's one of the reasons why I like to gather a couple of references before I build, just in case one of them is wrong or slightly off. So this reference, because it's an image, you can see that it's round at the bottom. But when you're using it as a blueprint background, you can just line it up with the closest point you can to the edge. That's close enough, just for reference to line up the outer edges. So I can already see that it's pretty different to the other one. So what we're going to do is go back to the top here, and we're going to start to deselect some lines here. So as you turn them off, you can see it's going back down, 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 down here, and we'll go back to that one. So let's delete and fix this up. So we're going to select the last one that we used, just pull it up a little bit, bring it in. Now we've got this line joining here, and that's because the new object has dropped to the bottom of the list. So you always want to make sure that the list is going in one direction. So right now it's going from 0 to 8, and then 9 jumped at the bottom, which is trying to connect it to the bottom. So if you have this kind of error, you can always just go and reverse your objects here. So make sure that the next one always appears at the bottom of your list. There's a way to change this in the settings, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'll just do it like this. Alright, so we've got that here now. It's all lined up. We've fixed the random line going through the middle, trying to connect it to the bottom, and let's continue. Here we go. Now that's already looking a lot better than it did before. Beautiful. Alright. We go to the bottom, you can see what happens when you don't define the edge. It's not so obvious in this one, but just for safety, you can see if you change the object, you've got a hole there. Anyway, let's get this first object, control, move it on top. Even though it's a higher number, we want it to be before the very first one because we're making adjustments now. So we're going to select it and scale it down, and we can go back and just duplicate that one on top to create a sharp edge and scale it down a little bit. So it's not always perfect. There's always just a little bit of curve to add some realism. For this section, we're going to work on the top of the can. Now what I've done is I've just jumped into the top view. You can see here, we've got our side view, the perspective, and what we've done is gone into the top view. I've selected Alt V again. You go to image and you can select your reference image, which will be the top, and just adjust it to the center of your scene. So with this one, I've had to rotate it a little bit because I'm going to be building a symmetrical object. So I want it to be exactly in the middle to make sure everything is perfect. All right, now the first thing we're going to do, we're going to use a different style of modeling tool. It's going to be pretty manual, the traditional way of modeling. So we're going to create this plane here. This plane is a procedural plane. So it just creates a flat object with a bunch of geometry, and you can control how much geometry is there. You can't see it in this view, but if you look at this view here, so let's start by bringing that all the way to the top. And you can see there's no lines there, but as I build it up, there are more lines. So to make this as easy as possible, we'll leave it at 0, and we're going to hit C C is going to break that object. It's no longer procedural, and we can now adjust the edges. Now, if you're unfamiliar with these tools, you have point, which allows you to select the points and adjust the points of an object. We have line, where you can adjust the lines. You have faces, where you can move the face. This one is just one face, so you can't really see what's happening. And that's it. The first thing we're going to do is select M. M is a shortcut that you use to get to some other tools. So they're pretty much modeling tools. You can see through the list, iron, edge cut, polypen. The one we're going to use is L, loop path cut. So the shortcut is just ML, and it comes up with our shortcut here. There we go. We can create a line here, create a line here. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the very edge of the can, top here of where the lid is. There we go. We make a line there, and we're going to make another line in the very middle, and this helps to make it exactly in the middle. Then we're going to go here and just delete those lines, and we've got the outer shape of this can. And this process is just a continuation of creating lines and slowly adjusting them. So I'll show you just a little bit here. So we're going to create a line there, a line there, a line there, and let's say one there at 15, another one here at 85. So they're perfectly the same. And from here, we'll just start to break the shape up. So let's create another one here. Doesn't have to be perfectly in the right number. Doesn't really matter. All right, let's do that. Next thing you want to do is start deleting more lines. So from here, we don't need this face. We don't need that face. We don't need this face or that face. Actually, I'm going to delete all of these faces on the edge and keep it simple. Keep it to a simple object. Now we're going to select the edge tool. Got the edge tool, and make sure you've got both sides selected, or you can actually, probably better for this one if we select the point tool. Now you grab both sides, move it down a little bit, scale, move it in a little bit, and start to adjust it. Alright, so I've just made a couple more lines and slowly adjusted the points to fit the outer edge of this shape. We want to get as close as possible, and then at the end we're going to throw it into a shape which is a subdivision. So subdivision surface, you've got that there, and drop the plane inside there so it's a child of it, and you can see that it's become rounded. So you don't need to be too detailed. You can see it slowly changes the shape there. So if we go now, you can see it's rounded, a bit sharp. If you wanted to go and adjust it a little bit more on the fly, or maybe make it your own, you can scale down, give it a little bit of your own style here, make it come in. I think that's pretty good for what we're doing, so I'll turn that off for now. The next thing we're going to do is create a hole here. So the way I create a hole is, again, ML to create a loop cut, and we'll create it at 50, and then on this side at 50. Then we're going to select the middle here, delete it. Let's see how it looks. That's pretty close. So all we need to do now is just bring out the edges using the points. So because we're trying to make it symmetrical, you want to select both sides at once. There we go. Now we've got a hole here. Now we've got this interesting shape there. How are we going to create that hole? Well, we use the same type of tool. Alright, now we've got the basic shape of our object. You can see we've got subdivision surface doing a lot of the work for us. It's practically the shape that we want. I'm not going to get too much into detail because this is just a basic tutorial on how to create it. but it's just more of creating loop cuts and modifying your points until you get the exact shape that you want. One important thing to note when you're working in this format, or when you're working with polygons in general, is to keep everything to 4 points. So as long as everything is a quad, it's going to help you out later on in the process. So you want everything to be quads when you're UV texturing your object, or just in modeling in general. If there's a triangle, for example, you might have a weird polygon and the geometry is going to look pretty deformed. Now that we've got our can lid shape here, it's fairly flat, so what we need to do is thicken it a little bit. Now luckily there is a new tool here called Thicken, which will make our lives a lot easier. So let's drop that in here, drop it in the subdivision surface even though we're not using it yet, and there you go, it's thick. So the only tools we really need to play with here is just the thickness here, so we can just assume that it's about that thick. The position will just help you adjust whether you want it at the top or the bottom where it originally was sitting. And I think that looks pretty good. Subdivision, so if you want to create an extra line there, so the subdivision, you see 0, 1, just to create an extra point. We'll figure that out now once we put on, there we go, subdivision surface. So without that line, it looks flat. With the line, it looks a bit better. And with 2 lines, it's a little bit sharper. So I think 2 lines is okay, but now it's looking still a little flat, so we're going to have to thicken it up just a little bit, just for render purposes really. So let's make it something like that's a little bit too thick. One more. Now let's move this into place. And there's one thing missing from the design of this can, which is this little circle here. Now that's going to be the easiest thing that we do today. So let's go back into this view. We'll get out of the can, and we are going to create a cylinder. So with this cylinder, you might be thinking, why didn't we just create a can from this? Well, you can, but it's a different way of modeling. The way that I've showed you how to model is more detailed and you have a lot more control. So with this, what we're going to do is just shrink this down, shrink it down a little bit more, bring it there to the top of our object, double check. All right, needs to be a little bit smaller. Zoom in, bring it up, roughly there. There we go. Have a look at the edges there. A little bit sharp. So one thing you can do is you can create a fillet. So what the fillet does is just creates a little bit of bevel on the edge, which is nice. And you can choose how many segments you want. I think 2 is enough. Afterwards we'll smoothen it out a little bit. Let's just go 3 for the purpose of this tutorial. So let's bring it down so only half of it is sticking up, and we can pretend that the other half is stuck to our 3D can and that's holding it in place. There you go. All right, now for this section, what we're going to do is create the little bit of detail that we saw on the top of the can. So we're going to jump out of this view and jump into this top view. Now, if you're wondering that my layout may have changed, it's because it has. I just did some final adjustments to the shape here. So I had to scale it down because the shape was all the way to the edge, but that wasn't the edge of the can. So all I did was make that small adjustment, and now we're lined up again. So the first thing we need to do is, I'll show you here, we'll select this loft, right click, current state to object, which is going to break the object apart into something we can manipulate. The first thing we're going to do here is just hide this object here by selecting those 2 dots and making it invisible. And we'll do the same to the rest of them as well. So you can just slide up and do it to all of them. There we go, they're all hidden, gone. Now let's jump back into the top view, select our loft object, and the first thing we're going to do is create a line. So a loop here, sorry. Select ML for a loop cut, and it's going to create a perfect loop. So we'll select one there. And the next thing we are going to do is start to manipulate everything by hand. Now that we've lined all of that up, we have the basic shape of the inner bevel of that can. So it takes a little bit of time to line it up, and I like to line everything up with each individual edge just to make sure there's no strange geometry deformations happening. What I'm going to do is select just the edges in the middle here because we don't need them. So I'm going to hit UL, and that's going to create a loop selection. Shift, select, and I'm going to select this loop edge, and I believe that middle one there is from the bottom of the can because we're looking straight through it. And what we're going to do is press MN, which dissolves the line that we've selected. So now we're at the top of the can and we don't have that line, so let's just double check. Yep, that's right. Just got that shape here, and we'll work simultaneously in this view. So now let's go back and select this section here, which is the one that we're going to make bevel in, and we're going to hit MW, which is going to duplicate the line on the same surface. So if you want to see what I mean, just MW, and now left click, move it inwards, and it's going to create this shape here. Now it seems to be creating a circle in the middle, which I'll have to get rid of in a minute. So we'll bring this line in, and we're going to go to this view here, or actually this view, bring it in just a little bit, just like that, just a little section, and I think that should be fine. Have a look at this view. Now we've got a problem here, it seems to be sticking up in the middle. So let's go and select that middle line, we'll figure out which one it is. There it is. So there is one more loop selection that we didn't delete. So we'll select edges again, UL, click that, MN, dissolve selection, and it should be flat now. We'll have a look here. Yep, looks flat. Now what we're going to do is create just another edge selection on the inside here. Grab that, we'll make it directly in the middle, and what we're going to do is create kind of a slight curve that you might see going inwards or outwards, whichever one it is. So we'll select this one and we'll just grab it and expand the shape just so subtly to create that inner bevel. So you can see here we've got this kind of bevel going inwards, and there is that shape. So the next thing we're going to do is just double check everything's okay. So look at this angle, maybe we'll select this shape here so we can see the edges. So it's looking a little bit sharp all around. One thing that you can do is create a connect object. So if you go into this section here, look for connect. Now we're going to drop that connect inside the subdivision surface, and then we're going to drop the can lid and the can inside the connect. And what that's going to do is create one object which is being read by the subdivision surface. So to make things a little bit more easier for ourselves, we'll make this the can lid. This is the can. The can group, so everything lives inside there. And then we've got this one, which is the top of the can there, so we'll just throw that in the group as well. We'll just leave it as a cylinder, that's not too complicated. And now we can go on to the next section,